The massive Thax warship emerged from hyperspace with all the subtlety of a disco ball at a funeral. Its polished chrome surface, etched with what appeared to be bodybuilding poses of previous victories, reflected Earth's sunlight in a display that would have made a Vegas casino blush. Inside the United Nations Security Council chamber, Secretary-General Maria Santos stared at the main screen, coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips. "Are those abs carved into the side of their ship?" "8 packs, ma'am," her aide confirmed, adjusting his glasses. "And if you look closely at the stern, there appears to be a motivational quote that translates to, 'Do you even lift, bro?'" The transmission came through on all frequencies, accompanied by what could only be described as entrance music, worthy of a WWE superstar. A Thax appeared on screen, its 4 muscle-bound arms flexing independently, its mantis-like head adorned with what appeared to be a backward baseball cap made of chitinous plates. "Pathetic humans!" The alien's mandibles clicked in what it probably thought was an intimidating manner. "I am Supreme Commander Flex Mandibles of the mighty Thax Empire. We challenge your weak species to ritual combat for ownership of your inferior world." The Security Council chamber fell silent. Then Santos did something that would go down in human history. She picked up her phone, typed briefly, and sent the official response of humanity. "New phone, who dis?" The alien commander's antennae twitched in confusion. "What? What is this response? I am Flex Mandibles. I just said." "Sir, this is a Wendy's," came the reply from the Chinese ambassador who had been waiting years to use that line in an official capacity. "I do not understand. Is Wendy your warrior queen? Will she meet us in glorious combat?" Santos looked at her communication team, specifically selected for their mastery of internet culture and dad jokes, and nodded. "Show them what we've got." What followed was 3 hours of the Thax receiving, in order, the entire collection of classic Rick rolls, a PowerPoint presentation consisting entirely of dad jokes about space. Why did the alien get kicked out of the party? He kept planeting evidence. And a carefully curated selection of cat videos. "Cease this psychological warfare." Flex Mandibles was practically vibrating with rage, all 4 fists clenched. "You mock the mighty Thax." "Hi, practically vibrating with rage, I'm Dad," responded the British ambassador to thunderous applause from his colleagues. The Thax commander's next message contained so many exclamation points that the UN's printer ran out of ink trying to transcribe it. The gist was clear. They demanded a formal challenge under galactic law, with the winner claiming the loser's planet. Santos leaned back in her chair, a smile playing at her lips. "Tell them we accept their challenge." "Ma'am?" her aide questioned. "Are you sure that's wise?" "Oh yes," she said, pulling up her phone to scroll through more memes. "Because according to galactic law, the challenged species gets to choose the type of competition." She paused on a particularly amusing picture of a cat playing Monopoly. "And I think I know just the game we're going to play." From the ship above, Flex Mandibles watched the humans with growing unease. Their behavior defied all combat protocols he'd ever encountered. Where was the posturing? The display of military might? The ritual flexing of appendages? Instead, the humans had just sent him something called a D's nuts joke, and he had a sinking feeling that somehow, despite all his species' physical superiority, he had just walked into a trap made entirely of human nonsense. He wasn't wrong. The message arrived at precisely 3:47 p.m. Earth Standard Time, delivered by a Thax drone that looked suspiciously like a floating protein shake bottle. "Hear this, puny humans," General Flex Mandibles' hologram boomed, his 4 muscled arms crossed in what he probably thought was an intimidating pose. "By Article 7, Section 42, Subsection Gamma of the Galactic Competition Laws, we demand satisfaction through ritual combat." Dr. Sarah Chen, head of Earth's Diplomatic Trolling Division, recently renamed from Department of Extraterrestrial Relations after the Great Alien Meme War of 2156, sipped her coffee and raised an eyebrow. "Could you repeat that?" "I was watching cat videos." The general's mandibles twitched. All 4 of his biceps flexed simultaneously. "This is no joke. The challenge has been issued." As the challenged party, you have the right to choose the method of competition. But know this, the stakes are your planet itself. Oh my, Sarah deadpanned, the whole planet. Even Gary, Indiana? Especially your Gary, Indiana. The victor shall claim ownership of the losing species' homeworld. Choose your challenge, humans, and choose wisely. The UN Security Council convened an emergency session, which mostly consisted of delegates sharing their favorite TikTok dance challenges and sending them to the increasingly agitated Kuril-Thax fleet. What about arm wrestling? Suggested the Russian delegate. They have 4 arms, the Chinese representative pointed out. Chess, offered Germany. Too obvious, Sarah replied. Besides, they've probably analyzed every game ever played. For 3 days, humanity kept the Kuril-Thax waiting. The aliens received hourly updates, consisting entirely of dance challenges, cat memes, and vintage Rickroll videos. General Flex Mandibles was reportedly seen doing breathing exercises and stress-lifting small moons. Finally, on the 4th day, Sarah Chen stood before the holographic projection of the entire Kuril-Thax High Command. We have reached our decision, she announced solemnly. The aliens leaned forward, their compound eyes gleaming with anticipation. Earth challenges the Kuril-Thax to a game of Monopoly. There was a moment of complete silence, broken only by someone in the back of the UN chamber poorly suppressing a snort. Mono. Poly? General Flex Mandibles tested the word like it might bite him. Is this some form of advanced combat simulation? Oh no, Sarah smiled sweetly. It's a board game from 1935, you know, for families. A board game? The general's exoskeleton turned an interesting shade of purple. You dare to mock the mighty Kuril-Thax with a children's entertainment device. Hey, you said we could choose. Article 7, Section 42, subsection Gamma, remember? Unless… Sarah paused dramatically. You're afraid of losing to a board game? The entire Kuril-Thax High Command bristled. Their species had evolved from hyper-competitive insects. They literally couldn't back down from a challenge again without losing face and probably several vital organs. We accept, Flex Mandibles declared. Send us the rules of this monopoly. We shall master it and crush you. As the transmission ended, the Canadian delegate turned to Sarah. Standard rules? Sarah's grin would have made a shark swim the other way. Oh no, we're using my grandmother's rules, the ones that somehow involve trading properties for real-world favors and keeping a grudge from 3 games ago. Somewhere in orbit, the Kuril-Thax were about to learn why you should never challenge a species that turns everything, even family entertainment, into psychological warfare. The Kuril-Thax High Command's war room had been converted into what they called a board game analysis center. Holographic displays showed hundreds of Monopoly games in progress, while their finest military minds pored over rulebooks with the intensity usually reserved for planning planetary invasions. This makes no logical sense, screamed Chief Strategist Deltoid Smasher, hurling a rulebook across the room with all 4 arms. According to Rulebook version 7.3, landing on free parking grants the player all taxes and fees collected. But version 12.9 states it's just a resting space. And this handwritten annotation claims that in Cincinnati, landing on free parking means you have to buy pizza for everyone. General Flex Mandibles chittered nervously. Perhaps the humans sent us conflicting information to confuse us. No, a quiet voice came from the corner. Junior analyst Thorax Lifter looked up from a stack of Earth board game histories. I believe I've discovered something far more sinister. The humans don't play with consistent rules. Each family unit, social group, and geographical region has its own house rules, variations they consider equally valid to the original. A horrified silence fell over the room. That's barbaric, Flex Mandibles whispered. How do they maintain order? Where is the honor in victory if the rules are fluid? Meanwhile, on Earth, the diplomatic trolling division was having entirely too much fun. Send them the rulebook with my college roommate's mortgage redemption clause, Sarah Chen suggested, feet up on her desk. The one where you can get out of paying rent by telling an embarrassing story about yourself. Already did, her assistant grinned, along with your cousin's property tax lottery rules and that weird version from Wisconsin where landing on boardwalk means you have to do the Macarena. The KRL Thax response to each new rulebook was visible from Earth. Their flagship's lights would flicker in what human scientists had determined was the alien equivalent of a migraine. But the aliens weren't taking the challenge lying down. After 2 weeks of study, they unveiled their answer to the psychological warfare, the grand arena of mercantile combat. It was, to put it mildly, a bit much. They had constructed a floating stadium in Earth's orbit, designed to seat 100,000 spectators. The central gaming table was suspended in a zero-gravity field, surrounded by holographic displays that would track every move, dice roll, and property transaction. They had even installed what they called a money cannon that would shoot real currency into the audience every time a player passed go. Subtle, Sarah remarked during the inspection tour. Very subtle. The grand arena reflects the solemnity of ritual combat, Flex Mandibles declared proudly. We have even included specialized chambers for your human psychological warfare techniques. The guilt trip generation chamber and the passive-aggressive commentary box are state-of-the-art. Sarah managed to keep a straight face. And the snack bar? 17 varieties of cookies as specified in Rulebook version 8.4. Appendix C, Grandma's House Rules. The final step was selecting champions. The KRL Thax approached this with their usual militaristic efficiency, conducting a planet-wide tournament that involved 12,000 competitors, 3 minor rebellions, and 1 unfortunately timed case of someone flipping the board in zero gravity. Their process took 3 weeks. Humanity's took 3 minutes. My grandmother, Sarah announced to the Galactic Council. Your grandmother? Flex Mandibles looked like he was about to pop a mandible. You would entrust your planet's fate to an elderly female. Rebecca Chen, Sarah continued, pulling up a hologram of an 83-year-old woman knitting what appeared to be a tactical sweater. She's been playing Monopoly every Saturday since 1955. She once made my grandfather sleep on the couch for a week because he didn't pay her the full rent on Park Place. But, the general was practically vibrating with confusion. Our champion, Warmaster Bicep Crusher, has memorized every possible dice combination. He can calculate property value appreciation in his sleep. He bench presses small moons for light exercise. That's nice, dear, came a voice from behind them. Rebecca Chen had arrived, carrying a plate of cookies and wearing a sweater that read, "Kiss the cook," or "Land on my hotel." Would anyone like a snack before I take their property and crush their dreams? The KRL Thax delegation backed away slowly. They had evolved from the galaxy's apex predators, survived 1,000 wars, and conquered dozens of solar systems. But somehow, this small human female, with her offering of baked goods, terrified them more than any enemy they'd ever faced. The stage was set, the pieces were in place, and somewhere in the vast expanse of space, the gods of board games were probably reaching for popcorn. The selection ceremony was held in the newly constructed Monopoly Arena, a structure the Krulthax had built overnight that somehow combined the aesthetics of ancient Rome with a planet fitness. The walls were lined with mirrors naturally. General Flex Mandibles stood proudly before the assembled dignitaries of both species. Behold, the Krulthax Empire presents our champion, Warmaster Bicep Crusher. A massive alien strode forward, each of his 4 arms carrying a different strategic warfare manual. His exoskeleton gleamed with scholarly medals, and his compound eyes were hidden behind what appeared to be prescription safety goggles. I have calculated 17 million possible game configurations, Bicep Crusher announced. I have studied every recorded Monopoly match in human history. I have even mastered your primitive concept of banking. The human delegation responded by sending him a gif of a cat knocking pieces off a game board. And now, Flex Mandibles sneered, mandibles quivering with anticipation, present your champion, humans, no doubt your mightiest warrior, your most cunning strategist. Dr. Sarah Chen stepped forward. May I present my grandmother, Rebecca Chen. A tiny Asian woman shuffled forward, pushing a wheeled shopping cart filled with Tupperware containers. She wore a flowered dress, comfortable shoes, and the kind of smile that had convinced generations of children to eat their vegetables. Oh my, Rebecca said, peering up at Bicep Crusher. You're a tall one. Would you like a cookie? I made them fresh this morning. Chocolate chip. The arena erupted in Krax'ar's outrage. This is an insult, Flex Mandibles roared. You send an elderly female to face our greatest tactical mind? I also brought snickerdoodles, Rebecca added helpfully. She has been playing Monopoly weekly since 1955, Sarah explained. She's never lost a game. Except that one time in 1983, Rebecca corrected, now arranging cookies on a paper doily. But that was because my arthritis was acting up and little Jimmy was having such a rough time after his goldfish died. Sometimes you have to let the children win, you know? Bicep Crusher's antennae twitched in confusion. Your strategic defeat was intentional for the emotional welfare of a juvenile human grieving an aquatic pet. Of course, dear. Cookie? To everyone's surprise, Bicep Crusher reached down with one of his lower arms and accepted a cookie. He examined it with his various scanning devices, then carefully placed it in what appeared to be his mouth. His compound eyes widened. This is unprecedented. The perfect ratio of chocolate to dough, the structural integrity maintaining optimal softness while preventing disintegration during milk submersion. Family secret, Rebecca winked. Now shall we play? I have bridge club at 7, and Mrs. Henderson always cheats if I'm not there to watch her. As they took their seats at the official gaming table, Bicep Crusher leaned down to General Flex Mandibles and whispered, Sir, I'm detecting extremely high levels of psychological warfare expertise. She has already infiltrated my defenses with baked goods. Request permission to... You will crush this elderly human at her own game, Flex Mandibles hissed. The honor of the Krax'ar depends on it. Rebecca was arranging her cookie plates, humming softly to herself. Oh, and dear, she called to Bicep Crusher, do be careful with the dice. Sometimes they roll off the table, and at my age, bending down isn't as easy as it used to be. Bicep Crusher felt a bead of sweat form on his exoskeleton. Somehow, he knew he was doomed. The game began with all the pomp and circumstance the Krax'ar could muster, which meant there were protein shake fountains and a pre-game flex-off that Rebecca politely applauded while organizing her cookie plates. The broadcast reached every corner of both worlds. Humans gathered around screens in bars and living rooms, while Krax'ar watched from their gyms and combat arenas. The commentators, a mixed panel of human game show hosts and Krax'ar war historians, took their positions. War Master Bicep Crusher opens with a classical Euclidean roll. The Krax'ar announcer boomed. Observe his perfect four-armed dice technique. And Mrs. Chen adjusts her shawl and offers everyone more cookies, added the human commentator. Classic opening move. The first few rounds seemed to favor Bicep Crusher. His probability matrices were flawless, his property acquisition strategy aggressive. He built houses on orange properties with military precision, consulting 3 different spreadsheets before each decision. Rebecca mostly told stories about her grandchildren. And then little Timothy, he's a doctor now, you know, said the cutest thing. She placed a house on Mediterranean Avenue, seemingly at random. Oh dear, was it your turn? My memory isn't what it used to be. Bicep Crusher's antennae twitched. His calculations showed Mediterranean Avenue was statistically insignificant, but something about her tone made him nervous. By round 7, things started getting weird. According to my calculations, Bicep Crusher announced, you owe me $150 rent on Tennessee Avenue. Rebecca sighed, the kind of sigh that made everyone in a 5-mile radius feel like they'd disappointed their grandmother. Oh, of course, although she looked down at her property cards with a slight tremble in her hands. Although what? Bicep Crusher asked, already dreading the answer. Well, according to the Chen family rules of 1962, amended during the Great Monopoly Schism of 1973, landing on a property while holding the deed to its color match on a Tuesday grants the player a senior citizen discount of 50%. What? All 4 of Bicep Crusher's arms flailed. That's not in any of my rulebooks. It's right here, dear. Rebecca pulled out a coffee-stained notebook filled with handwritten rules. Right under the cookie clause, which, by the way, means you owe me 2 properties for accepting my chocolate chips earlier. The Krax'ar delegation erupted in chaos. General Flex Mandibles demanded to see this rulebook. 3 different legal experts were called in. Meanwhile, Rebecca hummed softly and knitted what appeared to be a victory sweater. The breaking point came at round 15. Bicep Crusher landed on boardwalk. He smiled, showing his mandibles. "Ha, but you only have one house here. The rent is minimal." "Oh dear," Rebecca said, putting down her knitting. "I was hoping you wouldn't land there. It's so expensive, and you've been such a polite young man." "What? What do you mean?" She pulled out a hotel piece that seemed to materialize from nowhere. According to the Atlantic City Amendments of 1967, ratified during my Bridge Club's summer retreat, a player may upgrade directly to a hotel if they've served cookies during the game, and their opponent has taken exactly 3 sips of water in the last 4 turns. Bicep Crusher's compound eyes darted to his water glass. He had indeed taken exactly 3 sips, but that's impossible. The mathematical probabilities, the strategic matrices. "Would you like another cookie, dear? You look a bit pale." "Well, as pale as a giant insect warrior can look." The Kurelthas champion's mind raced through his calculations, trying to find a way out. But every strategy he'd prepared was useless against rules that seemed to be invented on the spot, yet were somehow perfectly documented in a 50-year-old notebook. I. He looked at his 4 hands, each holding a different strategic guide, all now worthless. Rebecca patted his lower left arm. "Don't worry about the rent, dear. We can work something out. Perhaps your planet could host my bridge club next week. Mrs. Henderson needs a change of scenery." And just like that, it was over. The mighty Kurelthas empire undone by a grandmother with cookies and a rulebook that seemed to bend reality itself. The human commentator wiped a tear from his eye. "Ladies and gentlemen, we just witnessed a perfect execution of the legendary Grandma Gambit." The Kurelthas announcer was silent for a long moment before whispering, "By the sacred dumbbells. I've never seen such masterful psychological warfare." Rebecca was already packing up her Tupperware. "Such a lovely game, dear," she told the shell-shocked Bicep Crusher. "Do come for dinner sometime. I'll teach you my secret cookie recipe." In the audience, General Flex Mandibles could only watch in horror as his species' homeworld was lost to a combination of baked goods and incomprehensible house rules. Sarah Chen leaned over to him and whispered, "Never challenge a grandmother who's been weaponizing board games since before your species discovered space travel." Rebecca was already wrapping cookies in napkins for the defeated Kurelthas champion while their legal team frantically reviewed her rulebook, which somehow managed to both fall apart and remain perfectly legible at critical passages. "This is outrageous," General Flex Mandibles thundered, all 4 fists pounding the review table. "How can feeling bad about charging rent to someone who just complimented your cookies be a legally binding discount? The galactic law representative, a being composed entirely of shifting legal documents, rustled thoughtfully. According to Section 89B of Interstellar Competition Regulations, prior established local customs take precedence in games of cultural significance. The Chen family rulebook clearly predates first contact by over a century." But, the general's mandibles worked soundlessly. She traded Boardwalk for 2 properties and a promise to teach Bicep Crusher her snickerdoodle recipe. A legally binding verbal contract, the document being confirmed, pages fluttering. Witnessed by no less than 3 players during the Chen family Monopoly tournament of 1985, as recorded on page 47, between the chocolate smudge and the tea stain. Bicep Crusher sat in a corner, stress-eating cookies and muttering about probability matrices. The statistical models, they meant nothing. Nothing. Rebecca shuffled over and patted his exoskeleton. There, dear. Nobody wins their first game against Grandma Chen. Why, it took my Harold 50 years to beat me, and that was only because I was distracted by the birth of our 3rd grandchild." The Kurelthas High Command huddled together, their antennae twitching in synchronized distress. They had prepared for everything: mathematical warfare, strategic combat, even the humans' dreaded trash talk. But they had no defense against a grandmother who treated galactic conquest with the same gentle patience she used to teach children about sharing. "The victory stands," the document being announced. By the power vested in me, by galactic law, I hereby declare Earth the winner with all rights to the Krax'ar's homeworld. Sarah Chen stepped forward with Earth's response, but Rebecca stopped her. "Oh, I don't think we need their planet, dear," she said, putting on her coat, "but they're welcome to come to Friday night game nights. Bicep Crusher shows promise. He just needs to learn that Monopoly isn't about mathematics." She winked at the still shell-shocked champion. "It's about making people feel so guilty about taking your money that they'd rather lose." And so ended the Great Monopoly War of 2157. The Krax'ars withdrew their invasion fleet, but every Friday night a small shuttle would arrive at Rebecca Chen's house, carrying a group of muscle-bound alien warriors armed with calculators and an increasing appreciation for human baked goods. They never did figure out how she always managed to get Boardwalk and Park Place. Some mysteries, it seems, are best left to grandmothers. 6 months after the Great Monopoly victory, the former Krax'ar's homeworld had been transformed. The combat arenas now hosted bingo tournaments, the protein shake fountains flowed with prune juice, and the mandatory morning flex sessions had been replaced with Tai Chi in the park. The fearsome warrior statues had been fitted with cozy sweaters, and the Battle Hall of Glory had become the galaxy's largest craft room. Rebecca Chen governed from a rocking chair on her front porch, which had been perfectly recreated on an alien world, complete with creaking floorboards and a screen door that made exactly the right sound when it slammed. Her first executive order had been to institute mandatory cookie time at 3 p.m. sharp, planet-wide. Her second was to replace all military training with competitive knitting. "More cookies, dear?" she asked a passing Krax'ar's elder who had traded his battle armor for a cardigan. "You're looking thin. Do they not feed you enough at the shuffleboard tournament?" Meanwhile, on Earth, the Krax'ars had discovered that human board games were an addiction worse than their protein supplements. General Flex Mandibles hosted weekly game nights in his apartment, which featured an entire wall dedicated to analyzing the fluctuating rules of Uno. He had developed a complex spreadsheet tracking rule variations by neighborhood, family size, and phases of the moon. "But why?" he demanded one evening, all four hands clutching cards, his antennae twisted in frustration. "Can you not stack a draw 4 on another draw 4? "Because those are tournament rules," his human opponent explained, trying not to smile. "At home, we stack them. But last week you said, different house, different rules. And 2 weeks ago at the Johnson residence. Oh, the Johnsons play by Minnesota rules. Totally different system." The general's antennae drooped. He had faced war, conquest, and defeat, but nothing had challenged him like trying to understand why every human family played games differently. His once pristine military medals now shared wall space with participation ribbons from various game nights, and his tactical combat manuals had been replaced with dog-eared copies of Hoyle's rules covered in contradictory sticky notes. Back on the retirement world, Rebecca Chen smiled as she poured tea for a group of former war chiefs who were now arguing about proper mahjong strategy. Her granddaughter had been right. Sometimes the best way to win wasn't through force or strategy, but through cookies, kindness, and completely incomprehensible rule variations that somehow made perfect sense if you didn't think about them too hard. "Bingo in 10 minutes, she called out across the former parade grounds, now dotted with lawn chairs and card tables. "Winner gets extra snickerdoodles, and remember, no using your tactical targeting systems to track the numbers. We play by Earth rules here." A former Krax'ar's battlecruiser drifted overhead, now converted into a floating recreation center, its fearsome weapons replaced with shuffleboard courts and an all-you-can-eat early bird buffet. On its hull, someone had painted in flowing script, "Live, laugh, conquer your fear of random game rules." Peace had finally come to the galaxy, one cookie and inexplicable house rule at a time.